Labour, of course, are facing growing calls for regime change now as Keir Starmer comes under pressure to soften those reforms. He's set to meet with more than 120 Rebel MPs today over plans to tighten disability benefits. This could hit around 800,000 people a year. The aim is to save $5 billion a year, and the vote is next Tuesday. In a moment, Ed Davies, Policy Director for the Centre for Social Justice. First, James Heale, Deputy Political Editor over there at The Spectator. Afternoon to you, James. I mean, this is usually what happens, isn't it, when there's a bit of a row from the backbenchers in sizable numbers. The PM, the leader, gets together. They all have a big meeting, probably over there in Westminster Hall or something, have a good old chinwag to try and placate the moody crowd. And there are some very, very angry MPs on his backbenches at the moment.
Yes, there really are, Ian. I mean, we're coming up to the one-year anniversary next week since Keir Starmer was elected Prime Minister, and nobody thought it would be as bad as this at this stage. You know, he won a huge majority, 170 MPs, and yet we've now got a rebellion of 126. 6 more names came forward overnight to sign that rebel amendment. And now Keir Starmer belatedly has realised the threat, not just in terms of this bill getting voted down. No government has been defeated at a second reading of a bill since 1986, but also the threat, I think, to his own position. And people are now starting to brief against the Chancellor, his Chief of Staff, even the Prime Minister himself. So he's now getting personally involved because he recognises that defeat next week would be humiliation for him.
Absolutely right. Can he weather the storm? There's talk about watering down. There's still going to be MPs who vote against it, one would assume, unless he's going to get rid of the policy altogether. That's not going to happen. But if it's watered down significantly, he can get that 120 down to 40. Then he's kind of, a bit uncomfortable, but he's home and dry.
Yeah, I think that he needs 83, a majority of 83 to kind of 83 MPs. If they vote against it, then it will be defeated. If he is able to get it down, as you say there, to something like 40 or 60, some of which would be the Socialist Campaign Group of the sort of old Corbyn allies, I think he could live another day. But the key thing, of course, is how much is he willing to compromise? And these cuts are supposed to save 4.5 billion. They're really important in terms of the OBR scoring of the UK finances. And it's how much is he willing to give? I'd also note, of course, Ian, that he's already shifted his rhetoric. Yesterday, this was all noises off. Today, it was, we want to work with you guys. So he's already lost some face, but he can still hope to win the vote. And,
of course, the next problem is if he, halved it, so it's going to be 2.5 billion. Happy days for some of those disgruntled Labour MPs. He's then got to find 2.5 billion somewhere else to fill that black hole. So at some point, somewhere in this crazy system, there's going to be another group of losers.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, it's also the precedent that this sets as well for the markets. You have already seen gilt yields in the UK bonds have now risen above the level of the Trust mini budget. That's something that, of course, Labour made a huge amount of political capital out of. And the fact is, if they think that the markets won't wear future spending promises, tax promises, etc., that will make borrowing even more harder in the future. So I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the parliamentary logic, getting this through past the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the hard place is the fact that it's the markets and the fiscal situation. Of course, we had NATO yesterday, talk of 5% of GDP on defence by 2035. All the money, all the bills keep stacking up. And of course, will Rachel Reeves come back for more tax rises?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's been a bumpy ride is somewhat of an understatement. We've just been recording a programme, I don't think I'm giving anything away here, about Labour's first year in power. So, and we're all, as in the presenters here, sort of, saying our bit on it. And it was only when I was reading through it and recording it yesterday after the radio programme, I thought, this isn't the list you'd normally be reading out when a party's been in power for a decade. And there's U-turns and there's disgruntled pensioners and upset farmers and a migrant problem and a budget issue, a black hole that's doubled almost from when they first came in. All of this in about half an hour. I mean, it's been an awful year for Keir Starmer.
Yes, I was talking to one long-serving Labour MP who said, look, it took 10 years as Labour leader for Blair to reach this stage.
Yes.
We're 10, 11 months into this government, and already the Prime Minister's authority on the line. I think that's testament to, 3 things, one of which is some of his early mistakes, the second of which is the pace of politics increasing, and the third of which is the UK's exposure to the unpredictable world events. So something happens in the Middle East, the oil prices spikes, completely throws Rachel Reeves' figures into complete state of chaos. So those are the reasons why. But as you say, and it makes for fascinating viewing, although uncomfortable experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the break he's hoping for is, events, dear boy, events and all of the rest of it. So in the next 4 years, It could well be, the economy starts to grow. The fiscal sunshine is upon us. It's back to that sort of Blair 1997 feel. Everything's good. Things did get better. And we've all forgotten about farmers and folk who can't pay their heating bill.
Yeah, precisely. And I was talking to one senior figure of the government who said, look, Blair had this whole row about do you remember the petrol protests in 2000?
Yeah, there were strikes over that, weren't there? Or protests, as you say, yeah.
And it was one of the only times that Blair and his inner circle thought he might lose the next election. And that was the time the Tories went ahead in the polls, and they really panicked about that because it showed how vulnerable the UK supply chains were. We could see that in 3-4 years' time. And of course, the other thing, of course, is the flip side of volatility. Yes, voters have been shed since the election, but they might come back. And also, the right is quite split right now. So there is a pathway for a Labour re-election, although it doesn't feel like it today.
No, indeed. James, thank you very much, as ever. James Heale, he is, of course, Deputy Political Editor over there at The Spectator. Let's talk to Ed Davies, Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Ed, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Great to have you with us. And it's, you're absolutely the right people to speak to on this. When I think back to 2004, when your organisation was founded, Ian Duncan Smith, Tim Montgomery and others were there, setting up an organisation, a think tank to genuinely look at this stuff. And I think IDS probably came closer than most to at least moving the conversation on to a place where we can at least accept that, this is an area, it's the Gordian knot of every single government, welfare. Who do you give it to? Can you cut it? What's fair? What's not fair? It's people's lives that are here. Opportunity for some, social class. I mean, goodness me, it's all over the place. It's the hardest thing to sort. Well, I mean, who would want to be the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions?
Well, I completely agree with that. And so I do think you have to give some credit to Liz Kendall, who is currently the Secretary of State, Department of Work and Pensions, and is giving this a go. Because there's undoubtedly work that needs to be done on this, and it is not easy. It never is. You are dealing with people who are, by definition, on the margins of society, who are the poorest, the most disabled. But at the same time, it clearly does need reform, and there are far too many people who are being written off at the moment. I think just sort of top level, that you mentioned there in your intro that the aim is to save £5 billion. And I think that's the wrong starting point. That's probably the problem we're facing here, is that because that is the starting point, they've come in and said, where do we draw the line to reduce the spend by £5 billion? Whereas actually, the approach needs to be, how do we get people into work, leading fulfilling lives? Where are the opportunities there? And that will save you £5 billion. And so I think at the moment, because of the way they're cutting it, you're going to capture people who have cancer diagnoses or arthritis or cardiovascular disease that might actually be in real trouble. Whereas if you take a bit more of a scalpel to it and look at where are the areas where you really can help people into work, who could work, who want to work, you could make the savings a lot more efficiently. Yeah,
it's an area where, in opposition, when people talk about this, it all sounds very worthy. You remember back in 2010 when every leader at the time, Nick Clegg, Cameron, Gordon Brown, talked about austerity, and all the audiences sort of sage-like clapped along. Absolutely right, we do need some austerity. Then, of course, when you get into office and you have to do it, it's very different. I can remember, I don't know if you recall this, but during opposition, it would have been pre-2010, Ian Duncan Smith was asked to appear on I think it was a schools question time. They're always rather annoying when the BBC do a schools, let's get the youth to ask the questions. And I'm almost certain this would have happened. Some producer at the BBC probably thought, Ed, I know what we'll do. We'll get Ian Duncan Smith on because he can be the pantomime villain of the piece, and they'll all start booing him. The very opposite happened, and Ian started speaking and laying out everything we've been talking about here. The audience were clapping along. He had kind of almost the rest of the panel were going, hang on, this wasn't meant to happen. This man's talking absolute, and he was talking common sense. But of course, at that point, Conservatives were in opposition. When you put it out there notionally, people tend to agree. When you get into government and you have to put it into practice, as George Osborne found out, suddenly you become the Antichrist.
Yeah, very much so. And look, I mean, I spent a couple of years in government, and what you realise very quickly is everyone's right that we should spend more money on everything in some way, but it means that everyone's wrong. So, at the moment, the big pressure is on defence, and you can make a really good case that nothing is more important than defence of the realm. But you can make a good case that nothing's more important than health, or nothing's more important than policing, or nothing's more important than education, the future of our children, or poverty. And so all these organisations come to government and say we should have more money for this, and then you sit in the middle and suddenly realise this is hard. you don't have that much money to give out, and you've got to be careful, and you've got to cut your cloth accordingly. And I think in welfare, that's where we've seen huge changes over the last few years. I mean, there's about 1,000 people signing on for disability benefits every day at the moment, and it's not really sustainable. But more than that, it's a total loss of human potential. And I think you have to start from that point, like what gives us flourishing humans and a flourishing society, and work is a massive part of that. Having a reason to get up in the morning, set your alarm clock, go to work, feel like you're providing for your family. And so when you see those numbers go up, what you are seeing is a society that is not quite working. And you have to get back to brass tacks and say, right, how do we get people into work, fulfilling their lives, fulfilling their potential, not just how do we cut the budget?
Indeed. And what's likely to happen now, to bring it back to where we are today, is, of course, that there's going to be a watering down of what, Liz Kendall, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, that trio would have been around the table looking at this. They thought it had been agreed. They've got to save $5 billion, which, of course, to remind our listeners and viewers, that meant that the budget goes up, this particular area of the budget goes up to 13 billion instead of 18 billion. So, I mean, these are still extra. It's still going up, but just less so. They're going to have to compromise this now because those backbenchers are very unhappy. And there's nothing worse than an angry socialist, as we all know.
I think so. I mean, but I think the answer is not to just water down what you've got. It's to take a different approach. I mean, the thing that we have been looking at, we did a big paper last year on mental health and the causes and the consequences. And some of the polling we did was fascinating. We had GPs saying we're not getting this right. 85% of GPs saying we're over-medicalising this, we're over-treating it. Only 12%, no, I think it was 18% of the general public said that we should give cash to people with low-level mental health conditions. Because underneath, they understood that actually if you have anxiety or depression at a low level, I'm not talking schizophrenia, psychosis, anything very serious, but actually if you are feeling low, if you are depressed or anxious, sometimes work is a really good thing. And actually giving you cash that enables you not to work might not be the right thing, and we'd be much better off giving you help. But we know that talking therapies work, and they're much cheaper than giving you cash. Can we look at things like that ensure you are getting those people into work who have the potential, who often want to work and can be treated? And I don't think we're doing that very well.
Spot on. Listen, Ed, great to have you on. We will speak again, I'm sure. Ed Davies, he is Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice.